said I am down to rally. I will call you family, cause I will take a bullet for my comrade gladly. I am down to rally. I will call you family, cause I will take a bullet for my comrade.
Well, comrades, it's Mayday 2020. 2 months ago, California declared a state of emergency due to COVID-19. Coronavirus hit this country like a ton of bricks, exposing every vulnerability and precarity of our system. Our healthcare system, the most costly care of the worst quality that goes to the fewest people along the most dire fissures of inequality for the most amount of money of anywhere in the industrialized world. Our political system, a confused tangle of noodly incompetence rife with bureaucratic dick-stepping on a good day, a seething ball of malice shot through with incestuous opportunism on a bad day. Our economic system, where to begin? Who knew it might someday have been a bad idea to structure our economy so that only people with great jobs have sick days, health insurance, and savings, provide no structure for work sharing of essential tasks, and dangle a gigantic portion of that economy on the fragile hope that maybe someone feels like having a drink today. Ladies, gentlemen, non-binary folks, and comrades of all stripes, the countdown to revolt declared on May Day of last year in Santa Barbara by Bonfire Collective, Student Activist Network, SBDSA, YDSA, AFSCME, USLAC, Sunrise, SJP, and Clementine's Collective is up. And it's time to ring in the new year. You guys start your calendars on May Day too, right? We become very well acquainted with the new kinds of precarity we're facing right now, each of us in different and painful ways. The particular kind of struggle I'd like to focus on today is the challenge that the COVID crisis poses to our organizing. From an organizing perspective, the necessity of social isolation has not only challenged our communal bonds, but it has rendered impossible many of our most beloved organizing tactics. Gathering in huge meetings that last for hours, shouting at cops, "Be careful, they all have COVID now." Publicly displaying messages written on cardboard, and holding decadent festivals where we watch adorable children destroy effigies of the president. As someone whose primary work for the past few months has been holding the picket line at the COLA strike, hosting workshops and book-selling cafes at housing cooperatives, and interrupting Raytheon recruitment sessions on campus, COVID has forced me to adapt my organizing to meet the new crisis. So the problem presents itself. We have tremendous demand for more organizing to do more things, but a lot of our existing organizing tactics are not possible right now. To address this problem, I want to talk about the form of organizing that I spend most of my time engaged in: affinity groups. By affinity group organizing, I mean getting together with a small handful of people you love and with whom you share a common vision of the future, setting up good horizontal consensus decision-making procedures, and starting to look for local projects that excite you. Affinity group organizing has enormous potential to do immediate good in your local context. And since the beginning of the crisis, the affinity groups that I am part of have been able to do a tremendous amount of work on short notice. Through Bonfire Collective and the Coronavirus Task Force that have been formed with members of Bonfire and Student Activist Network, in the last 2 months, we've been able to set up a website with locally specific COVID resources, distribute flyers around town on sanitation and social distancing procedures before the city declared a state of emergency, distribute flyers sharing the ICE Rapid Response Hotline and providing scripts for ICE raids, make dozens of masks and distribute them to houseless folks, link up with Food Not Bombs and assist them with supplies and food distribution while some of their other members were away or under quarantine. Keep the pressure on city council members to mandate a rent payback structure to make sure people don't get evicted as soon as the moratorium is lifted. Begin lobbying city council to create a municipal-specific direct aid fund. Help win porta potties stocked with hand sanitizer and tampons for houseless folks downtown, the first 24-hour bathrooms in years. Use connections with the County Board of Supervisors to get information on eviction courts and jail population reductions, and help network the local housing crisis group with county staff. and link up with other prison solidarity organizers locally and across the state to plan actions around the nearby federal prison. I cannot emphasize this enough. We did all of this with fewer than 10 people. For all of this, affinity group organizing tends to get sidelined. We often overemphasize the efficacy of large-scale organizing like national campaigns, where we put a lot of eggs in one basket, big tent organizing that subsumes rather than acknowledges differences of affinity and quickly fragments, and spectacular organizing that is often best characterized as risky awareness raising. Affinity group organizing should not be our only tactic, but let's talk about why it's so important now by looking at some of the factors we're dealing with in times of COVID. First, everything is happening over Zoom. Being on a Zoom call with more than 15 people is insanely difficult. Social distancing has made large-scale organizing practically impossible, but small group organizing, such as in affinity groups, is still entirely on the table. For folks with certain disabilities, the shift towards Zoom actually makes affinity group organizing even more accessible than before. Second, you miss your friends. Affinity group organizing means that you have new cause to come together productively with your friends and do something positive for yourselves and your communities. Much more than a Netflix party, mutual aid conversations about mask distribution gives you purpose to connect. Third, a lot of people have a little more time on their hands than usual, and they're looking to organize. If you're new to organizing, it can be challenging to know where to begin. It's often hard for people to join big organizations. They can be intimidating, and a lot of them aren't run well. And it often seems like all the big decisions are being made somewhere else. Starting with an affinity group means you start with people you trust already, who you wanted to see anyway, and who respect your ideas. Affinity groups are essential, not just because it's what we can do now. The love and respect they are built on is the foundation of effective, emotionally sustainable organizing at every level. Fourth, much of the COVID work that needs to be done is hyper-local and requires a ton of local knowledge. We need mutual aid grocery and mask projects, houseless aid, and information distribution about ICE raids. When it comes to these tasks, a dozen small affinity groups organizing in their neighborhoods they know like the back of their hands can be much more effective than federal, state, or even county groups. Finally, organizing in long-term, sustainable affinity groups means that you will be poised to address new crises as they emerge. Bonfire Collective started during Occupy, and when Trump got elected, we were already on the ground meeting and could assist in holding workshops and in helping new activists find groups and causes they cared about. When COVID hit, we were able to quickly pivot to mask making and COVID propaganda, and Student Activist Network had a lot of political ties to pull on. Now, let's talk about how to build your affinity group. Start with a small group of people you care deeply about, your friends. Literally, just find 3 other people who want to get involved and set up a Zoom date to talk about what you might be able to do together. The key to affinity groups is, you guessed it, affinity. So let's get more technical about that. Having affinity with someone means you share a common vision of the future. You want the same kind of world. It is tiresome to organize with people who you don't share a common vision of the future with. While I don't think affinity alignment is necessary when working in coalitions, in my core group, I don't want to constantly be having debates about the merits of decentralized autonomous worker cooperatives versus central planning. So make sure you all agree on the basics. What the basics are will differ from group to group, and it often varies by your depth of political socialization. I recommend that, for a fun activity, for everyone to take some kind of "which kind of leftist are you" quiz, like this one here. Then talk casually about your results. There will be some variety in your answers, and that's fine, but it's probably good to make sure you're more or less on the same page. It's also important to think about identity. Identity informs how we see the world, our experience of it, our knowledge. Acknowledging identity will help your group appreciate each other's expertise. And while I don't recommend that people organize affinity groups based solely on identity, or that they exclude members based on their identity, groups formed around identity can be hugely effective in undertaking issue-specific campaigns, like disability activism. Finally, a discussion about tactics is essential. These kinds of discussions will help you figure out what you want to do with your affinity group. Are people in your group really committed to mutual aid tactics? Are they really dedicated to tactics of art and propaganda creation? As you start to think about what you love and what you're good at, you'll discover that a lot of the things that you do love to do, crafting, writing, cooking, gardening, can be politicized. More to the point on your conversation about tactics, though, is how do people feel about, say, risky actions? How do people feel about community self-defense? Having these conversations early on will prevent serious miscommunications down the road. Thanks for your time today, comrades. Here are a couple zines that can help you out. The first is about organizing with affinity, identity, and tactics, and the other will give you a tutorial on how to use horizontal, democratic, consensus decision-making in your new affinity group. Now get out there and start the revolt.
With the comrade, sharing with the comrade, Diddy bobbing volley with the comrade, down a couple drinks with the comrade, criticize the comrade, take the criticism from the comrade and try and get better for my comrade, solid with the comrade, never ever red on any comrade, I gotta stay sharp for my comrade, depending on the comrade, take a couple bullets for my comrade.